Hi, so first in my defense to Roger's comment about the dress code, if it makes it any better, I just learned how to tie the double Windsor on a YouTube tutorial this morning. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about high performance in sports and what makes the difference between a top performer and everybody else. And actually sports these days, high performance sports, is sort of drowning in data and managing to apply it to remarkably little effect because they're not figuring out sort of where and how it should be applied. And to do that, I sort of want to start with recreating a scene. So this is a picture of the 9 fastest men in the world. And I want you, just for a second, to think about the stadium where they're running. The stadium, picture last year's World Championships in the 100-meter dash. Of course, you might recognize this man in the middle as Usain Bolt, the fastest sprinter in history. So picture this stadium in Moscow with 50,000 fans, all there to see Usain Bolt, flash bulbs popping. And then there are 9 of the fastest men in the world sort of coil their muscles into their blocks and get ready to explode, right? And just for a second, just humor me and close your eyes and picture that as they get ready to start, to your marks and set. And then, bang, the gun goes off. And an American runner jumps out to the front. Usain Bolt starts to catch him. And as they come to the line, you'll hear a beep as each runner crosses the line. There it is. Could you hear that? That's the entire race. That's the entire 100-meter finish. That first beep was Usain Bolt. That second beep is a guy you've never heard of. That fourth beep is a guy who literally has to work as a roofer in the off-season, right? The difference between legendary and anonymity in elite sports is usually less than 1%, usually about 0.5% of the difference in performance. That, in this race, was the difference between Usain Bolt and a guy that nobody in this room other than me has probably ever heard of. So just to give you a sense again, I'll play that whole race again. Bang, the gun goes off. An American jumps out to the front. Usain Bolt starts to catch him. He starts to pull away, and they come to the line. This will be the entire finish of the race. That's it. That's the whole race, start to finish. That last beep is where the Olympic winner in 1936 would have been. That's how small the difference really is. And so the key for sports, while they've been gathering all of this data, is really figuring out how to find that 0.5% difference in the data. So I won't go too much into sort of the misapplication of data in sports that happens all the time, but I want to give an example of one successful application, very simple application where UK Athletics, which is sort of the sports body in Great Britain that had a big increase in funding when London won the Summer Olympics last year, how they decided to apply some sports science. Rather than just continuing to gather huge amounts of data, which is what most sports bodies were doing, they decided first to try to figure out very simply what they could actually affect before they just gathered tons of data. And to do that, they wanted to look at an event where they thought they could win some more medals. And these were the field events in track where they felt they could win more medals. So they looked at Shotput, right? And they said, well, what determines how far the shot goes? And they narrowed it down to 3 things that determine how far the shot goes. The first being the height, the velocity of the release of the shot being one. Another being the release height, so how far above the thrower's head his hand is when he releases the shot. And finally, the angle, the release angle. So those 3 things are essentially all there is to shot put. And they said, well, let's look at this in a competition between the 2 best people in the world. So they went and looked at the 2007 World Championships, where the 2 best shot putters were competing, and said, well, let's see what the difference between them was. So here are those 2 men. The gold medal winner was a man named Reese Hoffa, who threw 72 feet and 4 inches. The silver medalist was a Dartmouth grad named Adam Nelson, 70 feet and 11 inches. And so UK Athletics decided to look at those parameters they had narrowed it down to. And they said, well, okay, let's look at height. Whoa, Adam Nelson, the guy who got silver, actually released from a higher point. So he had an advantage there. So far, so good for him. He actually released faster, too. So he had the advantage of height. He had the velocity advantage. But what about that third variable, the angle of release? In this case, Reese Hoffa released the shot at 1.5 degrees higher, and that made the difference between gold and silver, right? So let's say if Adam Nelson had tweaked his release a little bit. If he had tweaked his release such that instead of throwing at 31.5 degrees, he'd thrown 1 degree higher. Instead of 70 feet and 11 inches, he would have thrown 72 feet, 4.5 inches, and he would have been the gold medalist instead of the silver medalist. And in a sport like shot put, the difference between winning gold and silver, in this case it would have been 1/2 inch, is the difference between essentially being able to make a living at it and having to have an off-season job. There's only space at the top for sponsorship in these kind of sports. So this tiny difference can alchemize silver into gold. And so when UK Athletics realized this, they said, you know what, maybe we can apply this to other sports. What can we actually change? And they said, let's look at long jump. So UK Athletics hired a PhD biomechanist, of which there are precious few in the world, and created a new job title called Horizontal Jumps Specialist. All this guy's job was to do was to watch long jumpers over and over and over and try to decide what he could change. So the biomechanist decided that it's pretty similar to Shotput. So the speed of approach down the runway is factor 1, the amount of force that the jumper puts into the jumping board is factor 2, and factor 3 is the jump angle. He very quickly realized that speed is incredibly difficult to coach, so forget about that. Force into the board, you can coach, but at that level, you're pretty much where you are, so that's really hard. Angle, he could change. The jump angle, he could change. So all he did was work with the best jumper in England named Greg Rutherford to improve his jump angle over and over and over. And what happened, just to heighten it a little bit, the ideal jump angle for long jumpers is about 23 degrees. And so, come the Olympics, Greg Rutherford did not have not even close to the fastest approach to the jump, not even close to the most amount of force put into the board, but he jumped at precisely the right angle and won the gold medal. So what this horizontal jump specialist was able to do was essentially take a guy who was not one of the best athletes in his field in the world and win him a gold medal by figuring out quite simply what was important and what he could change. And it was applications like this that caused UK Athletics, that caused Great Britain to have this incredible increase in medals at their home Olympics. And so, of course, these kind of applications of sports science aren't the only thing, right? There's a lot that goes into the point before an athlete even gets to this case, and some of it you've probably heard of, right? Practice, 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 right? The old 10,000 hours rule. So who here has heard of the 10,000 hour rule? Most people, right? Who here has read the primary document from which it comes, the scientific study? 1, 2, 3, a couple? Yeah, so most people have not, and most people don't know that though it's applied very heavily in sports now, it actually comes from a tiny study of violinists. It just so happens that the man, Anders Ericsson, the psychologist who did the work that has been turned into the 10,000 hour rule, while we haven't been reading his primary sources, he has been reading the popular interpretations of the 10,000 hour rule. And he, just as of recently, posted a letter on his faculty webpage at Florida State, and I'll sort of let the title of it speak for itself in terms of how he feels about the portrayal of the 10,000 hour rule in popular media. It is the danger of delegating education to journalists. Yeah, no offense taken. So in my longer talk today, I'm going to really get into the background of the 10,000 hour rule and why this number 10,000 has been so destructive in sports, but just to highlight one of the problems. So first of all, this was, again, a study of a group of violinists, 10 of them, who had been already admitted to a world-famous music academy, right? So first off, this would be like doing a study of basketball skill, restricting it to NBA centers, noticing they'd practiced a lot, and concluding that's the only reason they got to the NBA, not practice plus being 7 feet tall. So that was one problem. Another was that it was an average and amazingly got published in a peer-reviewed journal without any measure of variance at all. Huge problem in sports science, lack of measures of variance. So to give an example of why that's problematic, rather than 10,000 hours, to reach international master status in chess, average number of hours of practice is 11,053. So it's an 11,053 hour rule, right? But some people make it in 3,000 hours. And some people are at 25,000 hours and still haven't made it. So you can call it an 11,053 hour rule, but what does that get you? So using the breadth of the sports science, I've sort of retitled the rule just a little bit to more accurately reflect the scientific literature and all manner of skill acquisition, and that is what I call the 10,000 hours plus or minus 10,000 hours rule. And I'll talk a lot, even though I've given it away, I'll talk a lot more about it and why it has been dangerously applied in high-performance sports science in my later talk, so I hope to see some of you there. Thank you very much.